But none of those concerns comes even close to what's happening in Eastern Europe, what's happening between Russia and Ukraine. Russia, and prepare yourselves because this is the global headline, Russia is actively considering the use of nuclear weapons against Europe. Not against Kiev, against Europe. Specifically, the UK and Germany. Just taking out the UK and Germany with nuclear weapons. That's a fact. Now, we're going to explain why we know that that's true in a moment. And at the end of this open, we're going to play an interview we did a few hours ago with a man called Sergey Karaganov, who is a longtime political advisor to Vladimir Putin and one of the most famous public intellectuals in Russia, been around for about 35 years, advised Boris Yeltsin, 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago. And in that interview, he says point blank, yes, if the Ukraine war continues at this tempo for a year or two more, we, speaking apparently on behalf of the Russian government, on behalf of his friend Putin, or at least someone who's very familiar with President Putin's thinking, we, Russia, will eliminate the UK and Germany with nuclear weapons. Now, that's a headline. We're going to take them out. We're going to eliminate those countries with nuclear weapons, saying that right into camera. So that's a pretty big story. Have you read that story? Has anyone mentioned that to you? That the most famous public intellectual in Russia, a close friend of Vladimir Putin's, exactly the same age, the two were born a month apart, have known each other a long time, is saying in public that Russia plans to use nuclear weapons against Western Europe. Russia is going to blow up the UK and Germany if things don't get resolved soon. You probably haven't heard that. It hasn't actually been on the front page of the New York Times. I don't think the Times of London has mentioned it. No one seems to be paying any attention at all to the biggest story of our lifetimes, potentially. And that's very odd. So let's just think this through for a sec. Why would Russia, which is supposedly in this bitter war against Ukraine, being backstopped by NATO and the US, et cetera, but they're fighting Ukraine over territory, why would Russia be threatening Europe? Because the Russians, whatever their faults, don't lie to themselves as aggressively as we do. And the Russians are saying out loud what is absolutely true about this war, which is it's a proxy war. It is not a war between Russia and Ukraine, and it never has been. And nothing that's happened in Ukraine since the fall of the Soviet Union 35 years ago has really been about Ukraine. There has been a global scramble to control Ukraine, its land, its resources. There are other reasons people want to control Ukraine that are not directly related to land or resources that have to do with history. But in any case, non-Ukrainians have been calling the shots in Ukraine for 35 years. That's what Maidan was. That's what the coup, the US-backed coup was. None of this had anything to do with Ukraine. What's best for Ukraine? We're going to make Ukraine a sovereign nation. The opposite has happened. Ukraine has less sovereignty. Ukraine is more of a puppet, and Ukraine has suffered more than maybe any country on earth over the last 4 years. And I'll just speak for myself and say, I really hope that doesn't happen. Yes, Keir Starmer's a joke. Of course, he's an insult to our ancestors. If you're English, he's an insult to our ancestors and to that nation. Of course, Macron is ridiculous. Germany, ugh. But do you want to see them destroyed? And according to Sergey Karaganov, they're very close to being. So with that, watch this interview and ask yourself, why is this not on the front page of every paper? Why is this not on the lips of every European and every American? Because it's entirely real. Here's the interview. Mr. Karaganov, thank you very much for joining us. How do you believe this war will end?
This war could and should be ended only when Russia achieves total defeat of Europe, hopefully without eliminating Europe. We are fighting not Ukraine, not Zelensky and the like. We are fighting again their Europe, which has been their source of all ills and all sources of evil in the history of humanity. Unbelievably, after all their defeats, they haven't learned the lesson. They're still pushing for a big war. I think, the reason is obviously that it's total failure of modern European elites. Never in the history of Europe have we had such a low level of intellectual capacities in the leadership of most European countries. Not of all, but of most. At first they thought of a possibility of a defeat of Russia, which was, kind of a fantastic illusion. But still some people, because of their intellectual, quote-unquote, incapacity, or they are still talking about that. But what is defeat of Russia? Just if Russia comes ever close to a defeat, that would mean that Russia now would use nuclear weapons, and the Europe will be finished physically. So, it's simply impossible even to think about it. But they have been talking because they need a war to rationalize their stay in power, to rationalize their existence.
It's interesting that you say their leaders no longer fear nuclear weapons. You would think everyone would fear nuclear weapons given their destructive capacity. Why would any person not fear the threat of a nuclear attack?
Because, let's put this: we believe that they are like us, but they're not like us. They have had a total degradation of thinking class and of the ruling class. When Chancellor, quote unquote, of Germany is talking about, recreating a Bundeswehr to be the strongest army in Europe, what does that mean? That means that he dooms his country for elimination. I have been talking with Europeans through most of my adult life. I stopped doing that in 1913 when there was a meeting of European leaders in which I participated, and I said that if you continue into this your system, there will be a big war and millions of Ukrainians will die. And nobody dared to look into my eyes. There were 70 or 80 people, most of them, they have degraded to the level that they are dangerous idiots or moral idiots.
Yes.
Most, not all of them, but most of them.
If there were nuclear strikes from Russia into Europe in the next year or two, as you said there may be, what countries would that include?
But my choice would be Britain and Germany.
You'd take out Britain and Germany with nuclear weapons.
I beg our Almighty that wouldn't happen.
Yes.
But Germany should be the first, because Germany is the source of the worst in the European history. But I hope, again, I have many German friends. I hope that it would continue the war. Not talking about peace. Referring to who knows whom, Zelensky or other pygmies in Europe who are blocking it. And it seems that this war is continuing, and maybe the United States in the end do not want to finish this war. So then we'll have to come back to the solution, which I have mentioned several times.
I think it's important for American policymakers and the American citizenry, the country, to understand the Russian perspective, and I'm grateful that you gave it to us, Mr. Karaganov. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.